If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. Where should I begin this tale? From the start, you say? That sounds like a plan. My name's John Miller and my wife Emily Miller and I have quite the story to tell. I recall my earliest memories, just kidding. Though that would be an interesting start, right? Let's jump ahead to when I first crossed paths with Emily Parker. We were just 8 years old, and back then, I thought girls were gross and annoying. So, you can imagine my frustration when I had to play with a girl. Her being black didn't bother me, it was the fact she was a girl that irked me. Thankfully, I outgrew that mindset as I got older. Our parents served in the Gulf War together, and became best friends on the battlefield. After the war, they returned home and got married, my dad to my mom, and her dad to her mom. Coincidentally, Emily and I were born around the same time. Emily's dad moved to Denver, where my dad ran a construction business. My dad gave Mr. Parker a job, and they soon became business partners. Things were smooth sailing until Emily and I hit 4th grade, and the construction business hit a rough patch. So our dads went back to what they knew and re-enlisted in the Army. Over the years, we lived on various military bases together. Emily and I became the second-generation best friends our parents joked about. Moving every few years is tough, and you need to prove yourself at each new school to avoid bullying or being ignored. So we stuck together and supported each other wherever we were. Our bond grew even stronger after we started dating other people. To Emily, I was just her best friend, and she was the same for me. However, after my first breakup, we started a tradition following a breakup. We'd go to the mall on Saturday for a matinee, usually something violent and action-packed. Watching a sci-fi or action movie helped us let out our frustration and recharge. When our parents retired during our 11th grade year, they resumed their construction business. This time it thrived, with more contracts taking them to Colorado Springs and Fort Collins. They were often gone for weeks, but their skills were in high demand. General contractors are always needed if they're not confined to local markets. As a result, Emily and I became closer than we were to our families. There were moments where we nearly crossed the line from best friends to something more. But we held back barely. It became increasingly difficult to resist, but we didn't want to jeopardize our friendship. Things came to a head when both of us were dumped a week before our senior prom. Emily's boyfriend, Mike, ended things over the phone, which shocked everyone. Meanwhile, my girlfriend, Jessica, delivered a breakup letter to my house without a word. So we both found ourselves dateless for prom. Thankfully, the local theater was hosting a Chuck Norris marathon. Those old Chuck Norris movies are timeless. Emily and I were still virgins at the time. She was a track star, and I played baseball. My buddy Greg asked about dating Emily, and I introduced them. He played first base, and I played second. We were a great team. Greg and Emily dated for nearly a year, and many, including myself, thought they'd marry after graduation. But Greg's story took a different turn. Long story short, Greg dumped Emily a week before prom to take my ex-girlfriend Jessica. This ended not only my relationship, but also Emily's with Greg and my friendship with him. Oh, and Emily's friendship with Jessica too? They were in the same cheerleading squad. Pretty tangled, huh? Yeah, a lot of pain was caused all at once with minimal effort. Greg and Jessica hurt us both simultaneously. That Chuck Norris movie marathon was a blessing. Greg didn't get away with it, but more on that later. Emily and I ended up going to the prom together. I still had 2 tickets, and we were both dateless, so it made sense. We danced, had fun, and it felt like a slap in the face to Greg and Jessica. I still remember picking Emily up from her house, just 2 doors down from mine, on prom night. She descended the stairs in an emerald green dress that hugged her figure perfectly. I was breathless and wondered what Greg was thinking. Mr. Parker saw my reaction, chuckled, and told me to bring his princess back by midnight. I agreed, took Emily's hand, and we headed to the prom. She looked stunning with her hair in curls framing her beautiful face. She wore minimal makeup, which she didn't need at all. I was struck by how gorgeous she was and barely managed to tell her she looked beautiful. Emily smiled, hugged me, and said I looked handsome too. That snapped me out of my daze, and we were best friends again. I managed to focus on the road as we drove to the prom. Greg and Jessica tried to put us down at every opportunity. Greg, who stole my girl, and Jessica, who dumped Emily. At first we ignored them, they weren't worth our attention. but soon Greg had to face the consequences of his actions. Despite our promises to stay composed, Emily nearly lost her cool a few times, and I was not far behind. When Greg taunted us, squeezing every bit out of Jessica and then smirking at us, we barely kept it together. We had to, though. My whole plan depended on it. Things worsened when everyone knew Greg stole Jessica from me, and Emily was seen as my backup option. But no one knew Jessica wasn't as great as she seemed. She was okay at kissing, but Emily was better. The big secret was that Greg had a reputation for smooth-talking girls and the myth of his size. His womanizing ways were our secret, too. We laughed about his conquests, which I didn't take seriously. I started worrying when he bragged about stealing a girl from Max Cooper 3 months before dating Emily. Max was a decent guy, even if we were just acquaintances. As jocks, we generally got along. Other athletes found my interest in comics uncool, but I had nerd friends for that, and Emily liked some indie comics too. I worried because Max and Cheryl had a very public breakup, and she refused to tell anyone why. She moved away a month later. "I can't believe it," Emily whispered as we slow danced, snapping me out of my thoughts. The coronation of the king and queen would be soon. "Don't worry, Em. I talked to Max this week. I also talked to Sam and Dave, and they're spreading the word too," I winked, whispering in her ear. "Besides, I've got the hottest girl in my arms right now." She smiled at me, showing all her perfect teeth. "You smooth-talking devil." She giggled and kissed me. I kissed her back, then she pulled away and looked at me seriously. "What are you planning?" "You'll see. Trust me. Before you and Greg started dating, he was a big womanizer. Turns out he still is. When he asked me to introduce you, he swore he was done with that." I stopped and raised an eyebrow. "Wait, what?" She lowered her eyes, then looked back into mine. "You didn't know? When he asked you to introduce us, he promised he'd treat me right." "That son of a bitch," I started. But she put a finger to my lips. "Shh, don't worry. We'll get through this." The rest of the night went as planned. We danced, and I finally saw Jessica's shocked face when she saw us together. Greg's smug look quickly disappeared when he realized I wasn't breaking. We kept our class and enjoyed our night. After prom, we went to a quiet spot. Emily pulled out a blanket from the back seat I always kept there. We got out, and she spread the blanket on the grass in the secluded spot. I took her in my arms and unzipped her dress, while she untied my tie and unbuttoned my tuxedo jacket. We slowly undressed each other, her dress and my tux ending up on the grass. When she took off her strapless bra, I saw her beautiful breasts for the first time. They were perfect. I gently laid Emily on the blanket spread out on the soft, thick grass. Lying beside her, I took a moment to admire her beautiful body, before leaning in to kiss her lips. "Have you done this before?" she whispered as our kiss broke. "No, Em." "You're my first," I replied, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. "Just do what the guys in the adult films do," she smiled, referencing the film I watched to prepare for this moment. I blushed and kissed her again, softly and tenderly. "Okay, but first, I'm going to explore you with my lips and tongue, baby," I whispered. She shivered, her breath quickening. "Do it, darling, please." Emily was my best friend, and now something much more. I knew I wanted her for the rest of my life. "Oh my God," she moaned. "Did you like that, honey?" I asked, smiling widely. She looked into my eyes with intense love and smiled joyfully, pulling me close. She sat up and kissed me with more passion than I could have imagined. "I loved it, Johnny," she whispered, finally breaking the kiss. I leaned over her and looked into her eyes. "I love you, Em. I've always loved you. I love you too, John. You know that," she replied with a smile, caressing my cheek. "I know. I'm ready for this. Make me a woman, Johnny." And with that, we shared an intimate, beautiful moment together. She sat up and kissed me again, then sighed and looked at her watch. "Baby, we need to get home," she whispered urgently. "It's almost midnight." "Well, princess, we don't want you turning into a pumpkin, do we?" I smiled. She giggled. "No, we don't. Besides, I think your Mustang would turn into a pumpkin if this were a fairy tale." I pretended to be shocked. "Well, it's a good thing this is real life. I've worked too hard on this car for it to turn into a pumpkin on prom night." I stuck out my tongue and crossed my eyes, making a silly face. She giggled again and kissed me. "Take me home, baby." "Yes, ma'am," I replied, practicing how to address female officers when I joined the army. "I like ma'am." I think you should call me that from now on. She gave me a silly face, and I smiled and kissed her. We got dressed, and I gathered the blanket and towels, putting them in the trunk. I kept my car clean, but I'd have to wash the trunk and launder the towels and blanket in the morning. I drove her home and walked her to the door. The lights were still on, and I saw her father waiting for her inside. I also saw her mother and suddenly felt very nervous. Don't worry, honey. Mom and Dad love you. You know that. I think we need to talk to them tomorrow. She read my thoughts. We knew we had to tell our families about our plans. Emily also chose the army. She went into the police force, and I went into the infantry. Yes, she wanted to be a cop, and I was just looking for adventure. We were supposed to go to the recruiting station in Los Angeles in October, so we had the whole summer to spend together. What happened to Greg and Jessica, you ask? Well, Greg was found the morning after prom, naked on the beach with the word dog painted in neon orange on his chest and back. Max and the guys weren't happy with him and decided to show the world his true colors. Jessica was nowhere to be found because the guys took her home first. It turned out she was too embarrassed to tell anyone what happened, and when Greg asked her to report it to the police, she claimed she didn't know what he was talking about. You gotta love shallow girls. As Max later explained, they took Jessica home first, then dealt with Greg, marking him appropriately. Emily and I laughed until we cried when Max, Sam, and Dave recounted how Greg tried to negotiate with them even as they made him strip, then held him down while Max did his best impression of an artist with a spray can. I didn't say it was a good impression, just his best effort. Fast forward 4 months, and our plans rarely went as expected. Emily and I couldn't get stationed together as a couple, so we decided to wait until our service ended to get married to avoid long-distance challenges. We seriously discussed this at the airport after my parents drove us there. We agreed to revert to best friend status during our service no pressure, and we could see other people while apart. If we fell in love with others, we'd stay best friends but not pursue a romantic relationship. It was tough for both of us. We spent the whole summer together, learning what each other liked. Emily continued to practice her techniques on me, and by the time we were leaving for training, she was very good at it. We agreed not to tell each other about any hookups during our service. We also agreed to be as safe as possible with whoever we slept with, meaning no sex without condoms. It was the closest to an open relationship we could get, but technically we weren't together then. No, I won't tell you about who I was with during my service. Emily didn't tell me, but we both admitted there were others. Heck, we saw each other very rarely during those 4 years. We took leave together when we could, but it wasn't often. There were a few more times we hooked up, but more on that later. We kept in touch by email and phone, staying connected. Our conversations mostly revolved around work and whether we were having fun. Well, at least it was like that for the first 2 years. Then 9/11 happened, and we were deployed. We ended up in relatively close deployments in Afghanistan, but were still far apart. She was assigned to a non-combat zone in Kandahar, and I was hunting Taliban with the 75th Ranger Regiment. We were filled with patriotism and wanted to find the brain behind the attacks and bring him to justice. Of course, my idea of justice involved a bullet between the eyes, perfect marksmanship. Unfortunately, I didn't get the chance to take that shot. Despite this, we still wrote and called each other, but not as often. We met a few times while in Afghanistan and spent a few days rekindling our relationship during those times. Those were the best days of my life. We decided not to re-enlist when the time came. We wanted to get out and be together. It was a hard path, and our lives together were put on hold, but we were finally going to be together. By God's grace, we made it out of that war zone alive. We processed out together at Fort Jackson and flew home to Los Angeles. We joined the Mile High Club that day, and it was worth it to be with Emily again, even if that airplane toilet was barely big enough. When we landed, both our families were waiting to welcome us. We walked off the plane hand in hand, reunited for the past few days in Jackson and on the way home. We had changed into civilian clothes after processing out. Both sets of parents instantly knew we were back together. We finally let go of each other's hands as our families hugged us. My brother even hugged me, understanding that I did what he never dared to do. Hey, as much as I hated that little brat sometimes, he's still my family. Emily's sister joined the hugs too. She had grown up a lot since we left. She was no longer the awkward stick, she had turned into a beautiful woman. Yes, I had fantasies about taking Emily and Cassie to bed at the same time. I know, I'm a dog. Not dog enough to cheat on Emily, at least. I'm not Greg, and I never will be like him. Heck, what guy hasn't fantasized about two sisters at once? Fantasies like the ones I had about Emily and Cassie are just that, fantasies. A play of the imagination. In other words, it would never happen in real life. Anyway, we decided we'd find jobs and use our GI Bills to get some education. Getting a degree in a good field would secure our future. We found an apartment and some part-time jobs, and settled into a fairly intense routine. We still found time for each other, though. We always found time for each other. I always loved computers. Not only that, but I was good at it, so of course I chose computer science for my major. I also got my CompTIA certifications in network, security, and server. I was more than ready to join the workforce. It's worth noting that these exams are some of the hardest tests ever created. I also took the A exams in one day, although it's not recommended. I barely passed the practical exam, but that was fine, I passed. So after landing my first job in IT, I bought an engagement ring, a half-carat diamond set in 24-karat gold. I carefully sized it for Emily's small finger and packed it in a box. Yes, it maxed out my credit card, but I figured I could pay it off within 6 or 7 months. With my new job as a network technician, I was making decent money. It was worth it. That night, when Emily came back to our apartment, I had wine, a Marie Callender's dinner, and the ring in my pocket. Just to be clear, I don't cook. I tried once, it didn't end well. Emily worked and had recently completed her MBA, finishing all the necessary courses in record time. We risked burnout, but we managed to stay sane thanks to each other's support. "Hi, beautiful. Long day at work?" I asked, hugging and kissing her. She dropped her purse and bag on the table and gently kissed me. "You could say that, love. Just found out Justin is retiring. We'll have a new guy from out of state." She rolled her eyes. We both loved Justin. She was like a second mom to both of us. It upset me too, but then I just shrugged. "Well, we can invite her to the wedding," I said with a smile. "Emily, I know I never did this properly when I asked you to marry me, so I'm doing it now." I got down on one knee and pulled the velvet box from my pocket. "Emily Marie Parker, will you marry me?" I asked, opening the box. "Oh, baby!" Emily's eyes widened, and her smile beamed with joy when she saw the ring. "Yes!" She threw herself into my arms and we fell to our knees on the floor. We kissed for what seemed like an hour before she finally broke the kiss, and I was able to slip the ring onto her finger. "I love you, John," she said, kissing me again. When we stood up, she looked at the ring in awe and kissed me once more. "I love you too, Em," I replied, kissing my fiancée again. We ate in silence, just gazing into each other's eyes and smiling. One of us would occasionally smile, and we'd laugh or giggle. We were both brimming with anticipation. We'd been unofficially engaged for nearly 4 years, living together for almost as long and working part-time while studying practically all year. Now I had a full-time job and was making good money. Now we were officially engaged. Life was wonderful. Emily now worked full-time at a real estate agency as the executive assistant to the boss, Mrs. Justin Hart. Mr. David Hart was an advertising agent, and together, they made $1 million a year after taxes. Now that Justin was retiring and a new guy was coming in, Emily was understandably nervous. But I was confident she'd impress him just as she had Justin. "So, when does Justin officially retire?" I asked as we sat on the couch after dinner. We cuddled, just enjoying each other's company as we had since we got out of the army. It became a tradition enjoying quiet moments after dinner, just the two of us, without any other worries, and discussing our day. "In about a year. She'll still be with us for a while," Emily said. "I'll miss her, Johnny. I don't know this new guy. What if he's a tough boss?" I shrugged and smiled. "Don't worry, darling. I'm sure he'll be just as impressed with you as Justin is. Going from being an MP to an executive assistant is a big step. You handled it with ease." "Haha, ease. Yeah, right," she snorted. "Baby, you have no idea how hard it was to become someone completely different from who I was for 4 years." I raised an eyebrow and looked into her dark amber eyes. "Oh, really? Let's think about this infantry sniper ranger and 2 deployments in Afghanistan to computer geek." "Yeah, you're right." I made my silly face, crossing my eyes and sticking out my tongue to the side. She actually blushed, realizing what she just said. "Sorry, Johnny." "You're right," she admitted. I laughed. "No worries, sweetheart." "So when do you want to get married?" "As soon as possible, baby. I want to be Mrs. Emily Miller by the end of the month." She smiled as she said it. I knew we'd get married, darling, ever since we were kids. I think I knew too. Damn. I'm so happy we finally got here, I replied with a smile. It struck me at that moment that we were truly soulmates. That conversation led us to meet with our families to plan the wedding as soon as possible. Our moms took over the planning with Emily and completely left us men out of it. So we sat and drank beer while the women planned the wedding. Sometimes being a man is great. Well, we almost made it to the end of the month. Actually, we got married on July 4th because it was an anniversary I could never forget. That was true, though I'd never forget that day as long as I lived. Emily was stunning in her white wedding dress. I wore my dress blues and even got a fresh haircut for the occasion. I wanted to look sharp for my beautiful bride, and I did. Justin and David came to the wedding and congratulated us. They then did something totally unexpected by paying for the wedding as their gift to us. It was a traditional Catholic ceremony, of course. That meant long and boring. And if I hadn't been standing there with Emily beside me and my friend Kevin next to me in dress blues, ready to smack me if I fell asleep, I might have just dozed off. When the priest finally said, "You may kiss the bride," I was more than ready, lifting Emily's veil and kissing her lovingly and deeply for at least 2 minutes. We broke the kiss after a significant throat clearing from the priest. We both blushed, turning to smile at our friends and family. Before you think we took any modern vows with a bunch of nonsense or weird promises, no. We wrote our own vows to each other. We made sure to include forsaking all others. That was the most important thing to both of us. We entered the church with a full commitment to each other. We left the church with the same commitment, not only in our minds, but in the form of gold rings on our left hands. What God has joined together, let no one separate, the priest said. Damn straight, Father. Emily and I made love every chance we got. She started working more hours at the office, and I started working more hours at Jones and Sutton Networks too. We were working 10 or 12-hour days sometimes, but we had one golden rule for our time together: no working weekends. It cost us both some potential extra money to stick to that promise to each other. Well, we had enough to make a down payment on a house at least. We were able to move out of the apartment and into our own 3-bedroom ranch-style house shortly after New Year's, and we had a lot of fun shopping for furniture and decorating the house. Okay, Emily had a lot of fun, and I just did whatever she asked. Granted, she always rewarded me for my efforts. Move furniture so it's in the right place? No problem. Reward? Excellent. Well, we had arguments from time to time. What married couple doesn't? Mostly it was over minor and trivial things. When we argued, we discussed it after we calmed down. I found that the best way to avoid a fight was to say, "Yes, honey," whenever she made a point. I also hugged her and kissed her when she was angry about some point I couldn't see. This sometimes helped. Other times she was really angry. But, as always, we calmed down and worked it out like normal people. We were in great shape, married just under a year, and as deeply in love as we were since prom, even when dating others. Because long-distance relationships are hell, and we didn't want to put ourselves under that pressure. We were still best friends. Now that we were married, we also remained best friends. We continued to talk about everything. I think a lot of married couples don't do that, but when you know your partner all your life and share all your hopes, dreams, and fears with them, it creates a bond that grows and strengthens. As I said, we were closer to each other than to our own families. The biggest hurdle at the moment was when Justin retired, and the new guy took over the office. The real estate business was slowly recovering, and some cuts were necessary. Fortunately, thanks to her office management skills, Emily was kept. A few salespeople were let go, but Emily remained the executive assistant to Richard, as promised by Justin. Justin wrote a glowing recommendation for Emily, and Richard took it to heart. He also seemed a little too taken with Emily's looks, but more on that later. The problem started about 4 months after Richard Jefferson took over the office, and Justin and David were in Tahiti on their second honeymoon. Heck, it was the Monday before Thanksgiving. Well, we didn't realize it then, but that's when it all started. We were still working long hours at our respective jobs. We called each other when we finished work, and she either cooked dinner when she got home, or I grabbed fast food when I finished. As I said, I don't cook. We did physical exercise together 3 times a week, early in the morning, which also became part of our routine: push-ups, sit-ups, and a 2 or 3 mile run. Usually we did this together, and during one 2-mile run, Emily told me Richard made an inappropriate comment to her at work the day before. "What did he say?" I asked. "He said I had a great ass," she replied. I laughed. Well, you do have a great ass. Your ass is one of the many things I love about you. Well, you're my husband. You're supposed to love my ass. She giggled, then became serious. I don't like the way Richard has been looking at me lately. This sobered me up, and I looked at her closely. There was worry in her eyes, and I decided to find out more about Richard Jefferson immediately. From Emily's description, he looked like a bodybuilder or football player who had let himself go a bit after 40. He was big, but had a belly and some love handles. She estimated his height at about 63 and weight around 275 pounds. Initially, she thought it was great to have a black boss and expected it to be interesting to work with him, which it mostly was. However, lately, he'd been acting like he wanted to sleep with her. Don't worry, Em. I'll do some digging into Richard Jefferson, I promised her when we got home. Thank you, love. I don't know, something about him feels off, she said with a worried expression. Say, can you come by and take me to lunch today? It'll give you a chance to meet him. Her eyes lit up. Great idea, love, she exclaimed and threw her arms around me. Put the fear of God into him. Maybe that won't be necessary, I smiled back. If he respects our marriage and our love for each other, I see no harm in a little flirting. But if he decides he still wants to try with you, I'll do what I have to do. Good. I know you will, Johnny. She kissed me again. God, how I love this woman and her kisses. The morning flew by, and I told James, my boss, that I was going to take my wife to lunch. He had no problem with it and told me to take the rest of the day off. We finally finished the project for Jensen Corp, and I'd have much more free time until the next big project. 6 months of running miles of Cat6 cable, connecting over 800 computers to Jensen's internet, and then bringing up the internal server was real work. Every computer was upgraded from Windows 7 to Windows 10, which required a lot of external hard drives, and the server had to be upgraded from Windows Server 2012 to Server 2016. Now we were reaping the rewards: more free time and maybe even a vacation. 10 and 12-hour workdays had worn me out. I couldn't wait to tell Emily about our accomplishments. She always loved hearing about my work, even if she wasn't as computer savvy as I was. I arrived at the real estate agency and parked right at the front. Now it was time to go in and see this big boss for myself. When I walked in, I saw Janie at the reception desk. Hi, Janie. Hi, John. You here to pick up? She was cut off by a loud voice. Hey, you must be Emily's husband, said Richard Jefferson, extending his hand. Sandy was also married to another guy. But why did he automatically assume I was Emily's husband and not SY's? I shook his hand, doing my best to grip his wrist with 2 fingers. If you grip an opponent's hand correctly, it prevents the Roman handshake. This fact wasn't lost on Richard, and I smiled at him amiably. Actually, I am Emily's husband, John. You must be Richard Jefferson. Nice to meet you. I'm here to take Emily to lunch. The emotions that flashed across his face in those few seconds told me everything I needed to know about Jefferson at that moment. First was shock, probably due to me being white. Next was confusion, which I attributed to why such a beautiful sister would marry this guy. Then there was a brief moment of anger, which said a lot about his character. Another emotion I caught was mild anxiety when he realized he couldn't crush my hand. The final emotion I caught was envy. To his credit, he recovered quickly. Well, nice to meet you, John, he said, releasing my hand as if it burned him. Emily should be out soon. He then turned on his heel and walked into his office, closing the door behind him. I saw him through the window as he pulled out his mobile phone and began dialing. He used an Android, which gave me an idea. I smiled at Janie, sat down, and pulled out my BlackBerry. I activated one of my programs and found the signal I needed. I cloned that signal. You don't work in IT without picking up some useful tips and programs, not to mention a few dirty tricks. That was it. Emily came out of her office and smiled when she saw me. I took her in my arms and, in front of a smiling Janie, kissed my wife tenderly. Janie is our friend, by the way. She and her husband Tim hosted the last company Christmas party before Justin retired. This year it was our turn. I have the rest of the day off, honey. I winked at my wife. Think you can take the rest of the day off, too? Well, with Thanksgiving coming up, probably, my wife replied. Sounds good. Beautiful. I smiled as she kissed me on the lips and went to knock on Jefferson's door. Yeah, this guy might be a problem, I thought as she talked to him. I sent a bit of spyware to his phone that would notify me of all incoming and outgoing messages and calls. I also added the option to intercept his outgoing and incoming text messages. Yes, folks, it's possible. Scary, right? I also created a new folder called Incoming Messages and tracked the numbers he called, and that called him. The hair on the back of my neck stood up every time I thought about him. Yes, our brief encounter raised red flags for me. I was on high alert. I knew there was a problem, and his name was Richard Jefferson. Know your enemy. Sun Tzu knew what he was talking about. Knowledge is power, which meant I had to know everything about this man, his likes and dislikes, his marital status, his finances, his history, everything. Emily came back, beaming from ear to ear, announcing that Richard gave her the rest of the day off. We intertwined our fingers, holding hands, and walked out together. We went to lunch at Carl's Jr., and while we were sitting there, she asked what I thought of Richard. "Oh, you mean Dick?" I asked without a smile. "Yeah, I don't like him and I don't trust him. His face gave him away when he came to talk to me and found out I was your husband, not Cy." "What do you mean, Johnny?" she asked. "I mean, he either feels really jealous, or he doesn't like that I'm your husband, or both." He hid it well, but his face was an open book for a few seconds. I detailed his behavior to her. Emily nodded. "So, what are we going to do about him?" I shrugged. "I've got a few tricks up my sleeve to keep him in check, but until we know what he's planning, if anything, we can't do much. But I cloned his mobile phone signal, and I can spy on everything he says or does on his Android." Emily gave me her "you're crazy" look. I just smiled. "Trust me, honey, I won't do anything unless he makes the first move. I'm not looking to start a fight with him. You know I trust you, Johnny." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I know, and I trust you too, honey. What I need to know now is how much you've told him about me." I gave her a serious look. She thought for a moment. "Well, he knows we both served in the Army, but he doesn't know what we did during our service. He knows we went to college on the GI Bill money, and he knows you build computers." I smiled. "Good. If he tries to get more information out of you, just tell him that's all there is to tell. I can do that." She winked and squeezed my hand again. We finished our guacamole bacon burgers, fries, and shakes and left. We then called our bosses and requested the rest of the week off. When we got back home, we fell into bed together, and the passionate urge overtook us again. I kissed her with passion. If you hadn't noticed, I love making love to my wife. Well, we both managed to get the rest of the week off due to Thanksgiving, and we spent the holiday with my family. Despite my brother, we had a great time and had some great food. Yes, my mom can cook turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, corn, and a very tasty smoked ham. On Black Friday, we decided to skip the sales, and I began my operation to gather intel on Mr. Richard Donald Jefferson. I found some very useful information about him. Bing is a great thing, much more accurate than Google for finding hard targets. Mr. Jefferson had a record of assault and battery back east in Newark, New Jersey. This was 20 years ago, but it was still on record. He served his time and had been clean since then, as far as I could tell. The details of the case raised more red flags for me. He beat a guy who came home and found his wife in bed with Richard. This was before Richard got married. I remembered him at the real estate office, and he didn't wear a wedding ring. More red flags raised in my head. I checked, and he was still married to Ariel Jefferson, née Gardner. His wife was gorgeous. She reminded me of Garcelle Beauvais, actually. Then I decided to play a hunch and opened a folder on my phone. I scrolled through the contact list and found something that sent a cold sweat down my back. The name Cuck Jimmy was attached to my boss's number. What the heck does Cuck Jimmy mean? I thought. Cuck as in cuck? Seriously? This had to be a sick joke. I continued scrolling and found several more numbers I recognized. The word cuck was attached to diminutive nicknames for them. I decided to dig deeper and found our home number listed under Hot Lisa. Well, she is hot smoking hot, actually. But the fact that he had her name next to hot was not a good sign. A plan started to form in my head as I uncovered more and more secrets about Dick. When Emily went out to get us lunch, I had more than enough to put together a course of action. Something bad was coming, and we had to be ready. As soon as Emily returned with Burger King, we sat down to discuss our strategy. She was shocked to see everything I had dug up on him. I traced all the numbers he had in his phone, his lawyer on speed dial, my boss, our home number, and a few unsavory types with records. I was gathering intel not only on him, but also on his cronies. I knew what needed to be done, when it would be done, and where it would be done. December came quickly after Thanksgiving, and we finished all our shopping by the second weekend. The office party was on the 20th, giving me time to set all the pieces on the board. On the night of the party, everyone from Emily's office came, including Dick, of course. The party was a huge success as we hired catering to deliver everything for 20 people in advance. One of the numbers on Dick's list was our neighbors Rob and Sue Charleston, listed as Cuck Bobby. We kept an eye on them too. I also wired the house with cameras and microphones. Every room transmitted to my BlackBerry on separate screens, and the data was stored on a cloud server. It was ready for action. I switched the spyware on Dick's phone to forward all messages to me for approval and monitor and record his calls to the cloud server as well. Lastly, I added a backup option just in case. As I said, the party was a huge success. Beer and eggnog flowed like water, but we had several designated drivers to take people home. We also had a guest room for those without transport. Surprisingly, no one drank too much, and by 11:30 p.m., everyone had left except Dick. Somehow I knew that after everyone else left, he would still be around. I was right. "Well, Richard, I think it's time for bed," I smiled, hinting for him to leave. "I think you're right, John," he smiled back. Yes, he actually dared to call me John. What a prick. "Yes, we really need to go to bed, boss." "That means you need to go home," Emily giggled. "No, I think we need to talk first." "Sit down here," he said, walking into our living room and sitting in my chair, gesturing for us to sit on the couch. Emily's eyes widened as she saw him sit in my chair. Oh, he would pay for that. No one sits in my chair but me. But I held my composure and sat next to Emily, interlocking fingers with hers, and we looked at him expectantly. "You've got a minute," I said with a shrug. "Just make it quick. Emily and I need to go to bed because we have gifts to wrap tomorrow." "I'm afraid not, John," he said with a sneer. Again with the John. Oh, I was going to enjoy what was coming next. "Oh, then what will happen, Richard?" I asked with a smile. "Well, you have a wonderful wife, John," he said, complimenting Emily but insulting me with his tone. "Yes, she is wonderful, and she is all mine." I smiled and squeezed Emily's hand as she smiled at me. I winked at her in return. "Thank you, Mr. Jefferson. Mark already knows how wonderful I am," she giggled. "Please, dear," said Dick, smiling from ear to ear. Then he turned to me. "John, you need to step aside. You can't compete with my size, and I know you can't satisfy this wonderful woman." Emily laughed. "Mr. Jefferson, that is very inappropriate. And let me tell you, John satisfies me more than anyone else." "But I know John can't satisfy you like I can," he said with a look of indignation on his face. "I know John satisfies me better than any other man." Emily smiled at him. Yes, this was not going as Dick had planned. Or perhaps he thought it was going just as he wanted. But the end result would be the same. "Oh, really?" he asked, standing abruptly and dropping his pants right there. "The answer is still no," she said, and squeezed my hand, shaking her head in a gesture of refusal. Now this was really not going according to his plan, but it was still within the parameters of my plan. Dick was clearly frustrated and losing his composure. "Well, you'd both better do what I say when I say it, or you'll both be out of a job," he snarled. "How can you take my job, Dick?" I asked with a smile. "Because your boss is one of my cucks," he almost shouted at me. "Oh, really?" I shrugged as I said it and pulled up the necessary file in the folder on my BlackBerry. The look on Dick's face was priceless. "You've asked for this," he said, pulling out his Android and typing a pre-written message. He hit send, but what he sent was not what he wrote. "I expected this move. Honey, you really don't know what you've stepped into." Emily shook her head with pity, looking at Dick. Just then there was a knock on the door. "I'll get it," Emily said, jumping up and quickly going to the door. Dick used the moment to smile at me. "That's my crew now, Wonderbread. This little sister will be ours in a minute, and you'll get to watch us take what's ours. This is payback." "Johnny, look who just showed up." Emily returned to the room, leading a woman who looked very much like Garcelle Beauvais. "Hi, John. I'm Christina. I'm the wife of this idiot with his pants down," she said, approaching and extending her hand. I got up to meet her and politely shook her hand. "Nice to meet you, Christina. I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. It seems your husband thinks he's going to have sex with my wife tonight." "Did you know about this?" I asked, glancing at Dick. Dick, now fully dressed, looked confused. "Where the hell is my crew?" he asked in a panic. "They just tried to break into Chief Swenson's house. The police were tipped off by an anonymous call, so they were quickly detained." I smiled at him. "Hope they don't turn you in to save their hides. That would be a real shame." Oh God, he whispered to himself more than anyone else, realizing his house of cards was crumbling around him. God has nothing to do with this, I said calmly. So, Mrs. Jefferson, what will happen to Dick? Dick looked at us with such fear in his eyes that I wondered how this cocky prick could be so stupid. Well, thanks to your tip this past weekend, he will be sleeping elsewhere tonight. I'm also sure he won't be sleeping here either, she said, giving Dick a deadly glare. She then pulled out an envelope from her coat and handed it to Dick. You've been served, she said with finality. Now it's time for you to leave. I smiled and pointed to the door. Dick began to walk, and I stepped back to give him room to pass. I expected what happened next, but he didn't expect my reaction. He lunged at me, aiming to grab me by the throat. I dodged and used my left knee to break a few of his ribs, then delivered a blow to his nose, bringing tears to his eyes. I then delivered a solid punch right to his groin as he staggered back, clutching his broken ribs. Bad move, Dick, I said calmly. Yes, adrenaline coursed through my veins, and yes, I was riding the waves of it as my fight-or-flight response kicked in. I began a series of punches to his face and stomach with 2 rapid punches to the solar plexus. He couldn't see or breathe well. I then landed a few quick kicks to his knees, bringing him to the floor. Finally, I dialed 911 on my phone to report an aggressive guest who just tried to assault my wife and me. I informed them that I had subdued him, but he might need medical attention. The police and an ambulance were dispatched to our address immediately. After they had taken him away, I turned to Christina as Emily and I hugged her. I'm so sorry about this, Christina. I know what it's like when your husband does something like this. But at this time of year… Honey, listen. You two gave me the best Christmas gift, no more, Richard. Christina smiled, and we all laughed together. Merry Christmas, you two, she said, hugging us. Merry Christmas, Christina, Emily said, hugging our new friend. Merry Christmas, Christina, I added, joining the hug. Dick was charged with indecent exposure, assault, sexual assault, conspiracy to commit sexual assault, and conspiracy to commit aggravated assault. His confession was already recorded on video, and I sent those recordings to the police with my best wishes. Dick's lawyer tried to make a deal with the prosecutor, but the prosecutor refused, and ultimately, Dick was sentenced to 20 years in Folsom Prison. His gang was composed entirely of ex-cons with 2 prior felonies for various offenses. Their attempt to break into the police chief's house earned them life sentences in Folsom under the 3 strikes law, alongside their good friend Dick. It turned out that they believed Dick had set them up for some strange reason. Needless to say, Dick did not fare well in prison. An officer found him hanging in his cell 3 months after his arrival there. He had been severely beaten before he took his own life, but no one saw anything. How did I do it? How did I set it all up? Well, for those who haven't figured it out, I knew my enemy. You see, everything in Sun Tzu's masterpiece can be applied to any situation when it comes to combating an opponent. Another favorite quote from The Art of War is to fight the enemy where they aren't. I called Christina and got her on my side by explaining the situation. He wasn't there, so I fought him there. Christina always suspected him of cheating, but could never get the evidence. He controlled their finances, and she couldn't scrape together enough money to hire a private investigator without him finding out. But it all boiled down to knowing my enemy. When all was said and done, Dick was a cocky fool. He thought he knew everything. He thought I would break. Why did he think that? Well, I had Emily provide him with false information about me when he asked her about my service in the Army. Emily told him I was a clerk with no combat experience. Having no reason not to believe her, he believed it. James, my boss, in case you were wondering, was not too upset that Dick went to prison and died there. In fact, once it happened, he divorced his cheating wife and came out relatively unscathed. He wasn't a willing participant, as Dick had threatened him and his kids. Dick was a typical bully. He was well-educated and very smart, but his arrogance made him stupid. He thought his huge manhood was enough to make any woman go to bed with him. Unfortunately, those women thought about their needs and didn't truly love their husbands. Emily loves me and thinks with her heart. So, we celebrated a quiet Christmas that year, just Emily and me. We finally got to enjoy our first holiday season as husband and wife without any disturbances. We hosted a small gathering for New Year's Eve, inviting close friends and family to celebrate the new beginnings. The year had been challenging, but we came out stronger and more in love. In the following years, Emily and I continued to grow together. We started our family, welcoming 2 beautiful children who filled our home with joy and laughter. Our careers flourished, and we supported each other's ambitions and dreams. We never forgot the lessons we learned during our early years together, the importance of trust, communication, and standing by each other no matter what. We stayed true to our traditions, like our Saturday matinee movie dates, now with a mix of family-friendly films for the kids. We also continued to exercise together, maintaining our health and staying active as a family. Our bond only grew stronger with each passing year, and we often reminisced about our journey and how far we had come. As for our parents, they remained close friends and business partners, watching with pride as their children built a life filled with love and success. We often had family gatherings, strengthening the ties that bound us and ensuring that our children grew up surrounded by love and support. Emily and I knew that life would always have its challenges, but we were confident that together, we could face anything. Our story was one of resilience, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between two people who chose to stand by each other through thick and thin. So, if you ever find yourself doubting the power of love and friendship, remember our story. Remember that true love is built on trust, respect, and the willingness to fight for each other no matter the odds. And most importantly, remember that knowing yourself and your enemy can make all the difference in the world. Thank you for listening to our story. If you enjoyed this incredible tale of betrayal and redemption, please hit the like button and subscribe for more amazing stories. What would you have done in John's place? Let us know in the